Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part 9 in the 56 Chevy gasser build. Let me start off by saying thank you for watching these videos, and I hope you're having a good day. I've been having a few physical problems recently, and it's been holding me back from getting things done on the car, but I'm feeling really good and I want to make some progress on it. Now, if you've seen the other videos, you already know that I've converted this car from a standard front suspension to the gasser style front end that was provided by the owner, which was purchased from Checkered Racing. So I had to go over a lot of details into how I put that front end together, and then I went through the processes of setting the engine in place, the engine cross member, and problems I had with that, and I've also installed the transmission cross member. Since that time, I've also put in the steering box, and the last video covered the Z-bar or bell crank for the clutch assembly. Now what I want to do is take care of some little detail stuff that needs to be addressed, and I'm going to show you some of that, but I also am going to disassemble everything and get paint on it. Hopefully I can do, well, I'll probably do most of that in a time-lapse type of sequence because there's just too much little things that need to come apart, obviously, but I want to show you some of the details involved with making all this happen. So let me show you where I'm at on the car and what the next few steps are going to be. Now, one of the big concerns that I have with this setup, this straight axle deal, is there's no limitation on the rotation of the steering or turn left and right. I can take this and turn it so far that it'll basically hit the leaf spring. That's not good. I need to have something to stop that. I want to have a nice angle that I can still make good turns with the car, but I don't want it limited to a very straight angle either. You want to make sure you're not limited in the motion of your steering. So what I'm going to do is put in some stops to give this a location that looks good and should function properly. Now what I've done is compared this angle that I plan to use with angles of the 68 Camaro and the 68 Mustang, and just try to give a generalization of this angle itself. So let me show you what I've come up with. Now, as I've said, this can turn and hit the spring. You don't want that. So as a comparison, I took basically this angle finder level that I bought at Harbor Freight, and the number that seems to work, at least from what I've found in my research of the other two cars, is an angle of about 34 degrees. So if I take this and I can slide it in here, get that out of the way, and I slide it in, I can adjust the angle of the tire to where it meets this blade on this level, and then that'll tell me where I'm at. So by doing this, I can come up with a number for this side and then make the other side match turning the other way. Hope that makes sense. I know there's probably some sort of complex formula for all of this. I'm not going to go that far. This car is not going to be put out on a drift track. It's going to be made to drive straight, mostly go to car shows, and that's about it. So it just needs to be able to turn around. So the process is going to involve these little gussets. Now we have a kit of these. They came from Summit. There's 10 in the kit. They're only an 1/8 inch thick, let's say. So what I want to do is take 2 of these, put them together, and they're going to go right here on the axle. And that's going to act as a stop on the back side of the spindle. So when the wheel turns, it'll hit this corner and create that stop point. So I'll index this where I want it, prep the metal, weld that area, weld this in, and call it good. I'll do the same thing on both sides, and I think that'll handle whatever we have to throw at it. Another thing I need to address, and I've talked about it before, is the location of the brake lines. And I mentioned in a previous video and showed that I had planned, the original idea was to run it behind what would be the shock mount, and then the other idea was to run it underneath between the frame and the leaf springs. We've decided a different approach will be used. When I was at Summit Racing the other day, I found these. This is a bracket kit. You can read the number there. Flex hose frame brackets. I was going to try a different thing to put on there, but it would take a lot of work to make those other pieces work that I had shown. This has notches cut into it, and you can take the brake hose and index it into any one of those locations and put your C-clip in. So what we're going to do, instead of coming underneath here or on the side, is actually come underneath the header and basically go up. So if I took this bracket and I put it about like that, I can take the hose, put it in the bracket. I'm not going to put the clip on it, I'm just kind of trying to demonstrate here. And that's going to put it in an upward angle to where it'd be easier, I think, to come up and go back to the firewall and up to the master cylinder. These brackets, I thought about cutting these off, but I'm going to use the whole thing. I'm going to reshape it just a little because it's not a true 90 degree. So I want to angle that down slightly. And there'll be one facing in the opposite direction on the other side. And that's going to take care of the brake hoses. Okay, now that we have the engine back out, we're going to be removing the transmission and the bell housing, put on the flywheel, clutch, pressure plate, all that stuff. And that way, whenever I have everything else done, we can put it back in the car, and that's the last time it'll have to be in or out, let's hope, as long as there's no other issues. The things that I need to address, some minor things, I'm going to be cutting off those transmission mounts, the original ones, as much as I can. I'm going to use the plasma cutter to get rid of those. I'm going to go over any of these welds that I have, make sure they're all nice and fully welded, and if I need to blend anything, I will. I'm probably going to add another support to, I don't know if I can see where I'm looking right here. Got the sun door open so the sun's behind me. I'm probably going to add another brace onto the clutch mount there, just to make sure it's good and solid. Other than that, the front end's going to all come apart. So I'll be pulling the axle back out, the leaf springs, prepping all of this, and then painting it so that we can put it all back together and move on. Whew, that took some work. I did take the plasma cutter to cut off the bulk of the pieces, but that upper section I could not get to, so I put on a very long Sawzall blade and I was able to cut both sides. So here are the pieces. You can see where I cut there. Same way over here. So now, the fun part, I say, getting rid of most of that excess. I was hitting it with a hammer. If you'll notice, that little weld right there at the bottom, it wasn't even really welded to the frame. So maybe this will separate okay, I don't know yet. Same way over here, that one started to pop loose pretty easily. So I'll use whatever implements of destruction I can and remove those remaining pieces, and that'll be a big step out of the way. Alright, so I have shot some time-lapse footage of what I've been doing, and this is of course the engine, transmission, flywheel, clutch, pressure plate, throwout bearing, all that stuff that had to be put in place. I'm glad we addressed this prior to putting it, taking the car back to the owner. He came over, lent me a hand doing this stuff, and we also swapped out the oil pan. We had a few things we had to address on the oil pan. The oil pickup tube was actually way long because they had put on this extended oil pan and extended the pickup tube. So we put on this oil pan and we had to shorten it up to make everything work, but we think everything is now in place and ready to go. As far as the car, I did finish grinding off all of the excess welds that held on those pieces on the transmission cross member. There's still a little bit of material up on top of the frame. We're not going to worry about that. It'll be hidden for the most part. The next things I will be addressing, as I mentioned several times, putting in these little gussets. I think that looks pretty cool. Have those on the cross member, there, and there. Just kind of give it a cool retro look. I also, after installing the brake mounts, I rounded off these corners. This was a very square piece, and I don't like corners on stuff like that. It's easy to snag on and catch your hand on. Once I get everything welded in, the plan is to disassemble all of this. So I will be removing, of course, the shock, taking off the axle from the leaf springs and then removing the leaf springs themselves so that I can clean up everything here that may be exposed, and then we're going to spray it with this Steal It. Now, I've used this before. This is really tough stuff. Unfortunately, it has a very long cure rate. So you're supposed to spray it, and then 6 to 24 hours later, put on your second coat, and then it says it takes 5 to 10 days to fully cure for, you know, max hardness. So that's not a big deal. What I plan to do is get all this cleaned up, painted, give it a day, and then set the engine and transmission back in place and have all that ready to go so he can take it with him. One other thing I may do, I did grind this down some. I may make another pass over that. I'm sure it's not going anywhere. Maybe clean up a little bit of these welds over here on the sides. Just minor things, but hopefully it'll all come out nice. I'm probably going to time lapse again most of this stuff. It's just kind of tedious work, and you don't need to see long drawn out videos of this, but that's where I'm at. Alright, I'm pretty happy with how this is looking. Now obviously I did a lot of this in time lapse, and there's really doesn't make sense to film minutes or hours or whatever of sanding and cleaning and all that sort of thing, so time lapse is very beneficial. What I did is I took apart all of the axle assembly, of course the leaf springs, all that stuff, and I took the spindles off because I wanted as much access to this surface as I could get, and that made it much easier. And by doing that, the owner doesn't have to come back later and take it apart if he wanted to paint something in this area. So I think it'll look really clean with all that done. The underside here, or the let's say the top side, the perches where the leaf springs mount, I just put this narrow board there to try to create an area where that leaf spring will end up. It's really hard to paint something like this unless you have it hanging from some sort of point, and I decided to just do it this way. I'll probably still put some paint on the other side tomorrow, but that's where it's at right now. It looks really good. The paint that I used, of course, I mentioned it before, is this Steal It. It's not cheap. It's actually kind of hard to find, but you can get it on Amazon. So we ended up using 2 cans of that stuff. This, the steering arms. I thought this was pretty creative. I have to give myself credit for this. I had these real long U-bolts left over from another project, and it worked out perfectly. You could put one in either end of these tubes and then hang it from the hoist with some safety wire. Can't ask for a better way to paint those. The front end, it's all looking really good. You know, the nice part about this kind of paint is it shows off the welds, shows the work that you've done, and sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not, but in this case I'm pretty happy with how everything looks with the paint on it and the finish. You know, this has that kind of a little bit of a sheen to it, so very happy with how this looks. I did, of course, crawl underneath and paint back to the areas that I had worked. I did not do the whole frame. My focus was this front section, obviously, so that's what I did. Now, the big step is I have to let this sit for a little bit, maybe a day or two, and then put everything back together. And that's going to have to be another video later. But overall, I'm very happy with how this looks. Again, that paint is not cheap, but there's a reason it's not cheap. You know, you can buy stuff at Walmart and you get what you pay for. I've used this product before on the cross member on the Mustang convertible that I built, and just really like it. And apparently you can even weld to this paint, is what it says. I'm not going to experiment with that, but I'm just telling you it's what it says on the can. So yeah, that'll be the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Let me say that first and foremost. Thank you for watching. Without you, none of this matters. You know, I appreciate everybody being here. Leave a comment, leave a thumbs up, all those things that help with the development and growth of the channel. I especially want to thank my patrons who keep supporting me, thankfully. You know, it's great to have that in your back pocket. Somebody that's kind of got you covered a little bit to help me keep making these videos. So thank you very much for that. But that'll be the end, as I said. And there'll be another video where I put everything back together and then basically kind of a rollout of the car, I would say. But have to put everything back together first. So until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya. Whew, that took some work. I did take the plasma cutter and hammer time.